The Dipsy Doodle. The cool evening breeze was blowing the sweat away. The tamale man sold me 24 slivers of red-hot delight wrapped in steaming corn shucks for 25 cents. Just as good as home in Austin. A half a watermelon in a green snakeskin jacket, its meat redder than roses and sweeter than love, cost another quarter. That was supper. The Dipsy Doodle sign advertised beer, so conquering the scruples suitable to my newly acquired title, Reverend, I went in. The first impression was of lots of life, but little traditional folklore. The jukebox was giving us Ellingtons in the mood, and the dancers, who might have been from Harlem or Southside Chicago, thankfully didn't appear to notice me. The big electric music maker in the corner again blinked its neon eye, and the room was suddenly transformed. Robert Johnson, the Liytle Robert of Tunica, Blind Lemon's foster child, began to sing out of the nickel-plated mouth of the machine, and the couples who had been dancing Harlem became Mississippians again. Slow dragging round the floor to the weary rhythm of the blues, the pull of the rough boards on flat-footed shoe soles, making their bodies vibrate against one another erotically. I got to keep moving, I got to keep moving. There's a hellhound on my trail. I couldn't watch that dance for long with any calm, so presently I took out my notebook and approached the jukebox, research-bound, for we planned not only to record more than fragments of folk song that still remained in this urbanized county, but also to study the musical shrine of that generation, the mechanical phonograph. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this neon-lit, chrome-plated musical monster was, for the people of the Delta, not only their chief source of new songs, but also an important symbol of democracy, one way for them to assert their racial solidarity. They put their money on the records they liked, and the rest went unplayed. Next week, the owner of the joint told the owner of the mechanical phonograph to send him more records of the type preferred. In those days of the neighborhood jukebox, always had a sprinkling of records to suit all the musical preferences of the folks who lived nearby and patronized it. Thus, a good way to size up the ethnic composition of an area was to look at the selections on neighborhood machines. Where Poles lived, you'd find polkas and mazurkas. Where the Irish lived, Irish tenors and Irish reels. All this, of course, has changed since big distributors, controlled, it is said, by the mob, have taken control of the boxes and the racks. In the Dipsy Doodle, I found that all the records were by black artists, and nearly all were blues whose roots lay in the Delta. Most of the singers no longer lived down home, but they knew how to contrive a song that appealed to the home folks, and a great number of record companies and hundreds of jukebox operators with their machines in thousands of beer parlors were living off this fact, and living well. The name of the principal manufacturer of these tireless music makers was Seaberg, but who wants a man whose name sounds like iceberg to have a part in the game when you're out with your lady friend? So everybody in the Delta called the machine the Seabird, or rather, with their soft accent, the Seabud, a name full of the tenderest, the most romantic associations. What'll we do tonight, baby? Let's go down to the Doodle and play the Seabud. What feminine heart, already anxious for diversion, could resist the temptation to play a Seabud? What could sound more innocent? What could be a more ingenuous pastime for country couples, but what I thought, as I jotted down the titles, this Seabud would sing for a nickel apiece, could so soon and so subtly put ideas into a young girl's head as the offerings of this hypnotic machine. Biscuit bacon woman, don't you lie to me, shotgun blues, when I've been drinking country boy blues, coal and Iceman blues, terraplane blues. I'd got this far with my list when someone pushed on my arm. The army-bound guitar player was regarding me with a drunken stare. What do you want? Me? Nothing. A man over here say he want to see you. Tell him to wait. I don't think you gonna "Want to wait when you see who it is," he smiled enigmatically. "More of the Memphis trouble," I sighed as I followed Dave threading his way through the dancers. He led the way to a booth in a relatively quiet corner. "Here you man," said Dave, jerking his thumb at me. Then he slid into the booth with his arm round his girl's waist. I must have looked surprised, for there was my research party, the team of my friends from Fisk University, Alan, the slim, lazy, brilliant young music professor who hid his intensity behind a big, loose grin, Eduardo, the keen, dapper Argentine sociology student. I thought both looked at me with a little hostility as I shook hands with the young English major from Columbia, an extremely handsome octoroon who had come along as an observer on the trip. And finally, regarding me from the corner of the booth with his sardonic but kindly gaze, was Lewis Jones, the man upon whom the success of this trip depended. Jones had a powerful build and the face of an Algerian corsair, but when he came south with his sociologist's notebook in his pocket, he was careful to move along as lazily as any plantation-conditioned black, and his face, when interviewing a white overseer, wore an expression of rapt and humble concentration. No plantation boss could resist the sincere but respectful Professor Jones, call me Louie and I'd feel more at home, when he knocked at the back door and, hat in hand, asked them to help him in his study of the colored problem. The toughest cracker overseers have confided their troubles and their secrets to Jones. The Baptist minister felt honored after a confidential chat with the distinguished young Fisk professor. And the working man in the cotton patches never forgot the warm, friendly young feller who leaned over the fence to talk about the weather and the crops. And so Lewis Jones came to be one of the best informed men about social conditions in the Deep South, holding what he knew in deep reserve, betraying his inner tension and his driving creative energy only in an occasional slight stutter. This man, my much admired friend, was looking at me sleepily, smiling his little sardonic smile. No one seemed especially surprised or pleased to see me. The fact that they were a day late was not mentioned, nor did anyone inquire what had happened on my journey. I felt more like a stranger with them than the crowd dancing to the jukebox. "Sit down and have a beer," said Lewis. "I was just explaining something to Dave here." "This the one?" said Dave. "He don't look like he could do all that much." "It's not just him, it's what's backing him up. He represents his whole group. They're solid behind him, and he knows it, whether he thinks about it or not. But me now, or Alan there." "But you big professors or something, ain't you?" Dave protested. "You come from a big, rich college up north." "That's right. But down here in Mississippi, we're just niggers to every white man that looks at us. It don't matter whether we got $1 million in our pockets and 100 titles to our names. That right, Alan?" Alan grinned and nodded cheerfully. Eduardo was following the conversation with a bright, objective interest. I was too embarrassed to speak, but the slim young woman from Columbia blushed with shame and anger. "Mr. Jones, this isn't slavery or Reconstruction. This isn't Nazi Germany. This is America in the 1940s. You're talking about an attitude that's going out. And you're using a term that's insulting to your whole race, yourself included. I have to stand for it in public, perhaps, but not among friends. Listen, darling," drawled Jones, smiling at her affectionately, but with more than a touch of malice. "This is your first trip to the South. The rest of us have lived here a long time. Me and Dave especially have been prowling up and down these old alleys and back roads at all hours of the day and night, and we know what the backside of the South is like. Not just the part of it they show to the photographers, but the juicy, old, funky, old backside. I even like some parts of it." Dave gave his girl a big hug, and she giggled. "And Dave and I know that every Negro got to have his white man, his boss, to look after him when he get in trouble with the white world. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but this is my white man on this trip," concluded Jones, clapping me on the shoulder and laughing as I winced. Alan and Eduardo joined in Jones's laugh. The beauty glared at Jones and me, while I wished I might disappear altogether from the Dipsy Doodle and the state of Mississippi. "And," said Jones, grinning at the girl, You were his nigger too. What do you think he was doing at the sheriff's office this afternoon? Tell them, Alan. Well, I had had so much trouble on the way down, I thought it might be better if I went in and gave the names of the party. There, you see what I told you. We were registered in the minds of the authorities who control the destinies of everyone in Coahoma as Lomax's colored folks. Jones was still laughing. But how did you know I went there, I asked. The grapevine, Alan. Over here in the New World, we don't have the police or the power, but we have the fastest and most efficient sort of intelligence system. Doesn't anything happen on the other side of the tracks we don't know about right away, if it concerns us? That's right, said Dave, turning proudly to his girl. I knew my draft number fell 3 days before the letter got to me. It's all too disgusting, said the girl from Columbia bitterly. It's real, honey, it's real, and not always disgusting, said Jones. But you'd have to learn to be born in Texas, where me and my white man come from, to understand it. My father had one of the best pieces of land down near Hearne, Texas. He taught the 3-month school they had for the Negroes, and he was the first registered member of the Republican Party in that county. And he voted. Voted on election day. He used to walk across the courthouse square all by himself every election day. Every white cracker in town watching him. Walk into the courthouse, ask for his ballot, and vote. That man was crazy, said Dave. No, he wasn't, Dave. He had principles, and he had a white man behind him. The local boys finally decided to stop my father from voting. Sent around a message they were going to burn our house down election morning. My father was sitting on the porch cleaning his rifle after supper that evening. Mama was in the kitchen washing dishes, crying, when old man Bates came through the gate. He was the roughest man in the county, owned a sawmill where he worked peon labor, led every lynch mob that ever came up. He had his gun on his hip as usual that evening. He walked up and howdied my father, then he said, "Put your rifle up, Sam, and you and your family go to bed, and I'll just hang around here on the porch. Nobody in Hearne's gonna burn this house down. Do their burning me with it." We all went to bed, and next morning there was Mr. Bates on the front gallery. Everything just as quiet as always. He asked my mother for a cup of coffee, thanked her, and said, "I'll see you down at the courthouse, Sam," and went off. And my father voted as usual that day. He'd been there all night, asked Eduardo. All night long. The word got around and the mob hadn't even formed. You see, he liked my father. My grandmother had belonged to the Bateses. And you can tell by looking at me that she had more than just a slave to him. So old man Bates was our white folks, just like Alan is my white folks now. Lewis embraced me rather drunkenly, looking into my face with his tormenting smile. The girl from Columbia rose swiftly. "I can't stand any more of this," she said. "I'm going to bed." Eduardo and Alan rose and followed her. "Better not reject him," Lewis called after her. "You may need him later on." The girl walked angrily out of the door. "Too bad," said Dave. "Look like it's always the best-looking chicks got the hottest tempers." "Well, if this is your white boss, maybe he be mine too. Maybe he get me out of this army mess. Think you can do that, mister?" "I'd try almost anything to hear you play that guitar one more time." We both laughed. "Well, I'm booked and bound to go day after tomorrow, so you all come out to the house sometime tomorrow evening, and I'll play for your machine. That be okay?" "We'll bring a bottle," said Lewis. "Pat, man," said Dave, grinning back. "Now me and this chick gonna snatch us some air." When they'd gone, Lewis said, "Sorry I had to do that to you, Alan, but I knew you'd want to record him. I think my little parable helped. Have another beer and look at this." He spread out a crumpled copy of the Clarksdale Times on the table. "Here's something we can record tonight if you're interested." He pointed to a news item on the back page. "If you notice that the streets were crowded tonight, this is the reason. More than 3,000 Negroes attend State Baptist Convention here. Mayor Dyer to make welcoming address. Father, have mercy." At least 500 Black Baptists were packed into the auditorium of the big wooden First African Baptist Church when we set up the recording gear and lowered the microphone from the balcony over the pulpit. The crowd below had the animation of a first-night audience. Well-dressed ministers walk up and down the aisles, gossiping with their friends. Bosomy matrons chatted and laughed across the back of the benches. Hundreds of fans bearing the ad, "Patronize the Moss Funeral Home, we give family service," stirred the muggy August atmosphere. After an interminable hot wait, the organ began to play and a robed choir rose and sang a conventional hymn. I looked at Jones reproachfully and soon switched off the machine. "Wait a while," he whispered. "All the Baptist leaders of Mississippi might be worth listening to." As the singing went on, a group of well-dressed ministers gathered on the rostrum. Then a door opened at the back, and the mayor of Clarksdale came in, followed by the bishop of the church. After the opening prayer, the bishop rose to introduce the mayor, one of Clarksdale's leading physicians who seemed quite cool under the gaze of the crowd. The bishop had the golden voice and the silver tongue of the old-style country orator. His introduction of the rather ordinary-looking little white mare would have made the angel Gabriel retire behind his wings. "Fellow Baptists, fellow Mississippians, ladies and gentlemen," he rumbled. "I now have the honor to introduce to you one who needs no introduction. Therefore, I shall instead offer my little tribute to the man." He paused and swung his gaze round the room. When he began again, he was not quite singing, but there was that in his voice which suggested song. "Back yonder, before the world in which we now live was shaped and fashioned in accordance with the plans and specifications of the supreme architect of the universe." "Well," responded some ladies in the crowd, not severally, but all together and in precise rhythm, as if the rising inflection on universe had touched them somewhere deep under their silk skirts and tickled them into delighted exclamation. "It was way back yonder," the bishop closed his eyes and spread wide his arms, "before the morning stars clapped their hands and sang together. Yes," intoned this time a whole company of the ladies, making a chord that any heavenly choir would have been proud of. "It was before the beasts roamed the dense forests, before the fowls tried their wings at beating the air, before the little fish swam the mighty deep." "Yes, yes," exclaimed half the congregation as one voice. The character I'm about to introduce and present to you was still hidden away in the confines of God's eternal wisdom. "Glory, hallelujah," shouted one old lady, rising to her feet. About 60 years ago, in the little city of Cockrum, Mississippi, was born a little boy of Christian parents, I am sure, who taught him the spirit early in life of dealing justly with all mankind, regardless of race or color. "That's true, preach, preach," shouted 100 voices. I'm talking about a man who is not only mayor of Clarksdale, a city of 12,160 people, but a Christian gentleman of the very highest type. Apparently, Mr. Mayor was accustomed to all this. He delivered a brief but cordial speech of welcome and then scurried away. The time had come for a song, a spiritual, and I couldn't wait for it to begin. In the past, I had tried to capture the lambent sound of black congregational singing and had always failed. The earlier portable equipment simply could not cope with a church full of black Baptists singing their hearts out, improvising harmonies and swinging round a perfect beat better than the best New Orleans marching band. Anybody present might heist the tune and lead. Everybody present joined in, each person at his own pitch with his own ideas, but magically joined together in harmonies to make Dvorak and Stravinsky hunt for cover. Only Russians could match the Black Baptists. You couldn't get the sound or the fervor into a studio or onto an aluminum disc. Now I was ready with good microphones, good acetate, and a professional recorder. I switched on the amplifier and lowered the needle onto the spinning acetate blank. My astonishment and chagrin grew by the moment. First came a lady in a long dress, clutching her handkerchief beneath her ample bosom, leaning against the piano and emitting pear-shaped tones like a concert soprano. Then, after an opening vamp, a berobed choir arose and performed with a vigorous young maestro directing them. It was hard to tell which was more out of tune, the pianist or the choir. Where, I wondered, was the fluid and spontaneous harmonizing of the past? These ladies were clearly having trouble with this music, especially with the harmony imposed by the piano. They limped and croaked uncomfortably along, and I sweated in agonizing sympathy. Instead of the sound rolling like sweet thunder across the church, the congregation tried and mostly failed to join the refrains. I just couldn't believe I was in a Southern Black Baptist church. Their second song was worse, if possible. "What is this?" I whispered. "It's the latest thing. They call it gospel," Lewis told me, grinning at my discomfiture. On the last quavering chord, I switched off the recorder and we went outside for a breath of fresh air. At a little street fair in front of the church, Lewis introduced me to a Reverend Martin in the booth offering gospel songbooks and sheet music for sale. Martin was eager to explain. "You see, in the modern Baptist church, we are trying to move on past the wonderful old cornbread spirituals and sermons, as they say, with gravy on them. We want to bring our people forward with a new and more progressive type of music, created especially for modern worship by our leading composers. The old sister leading songs from the back row is being replaced by an educated musical director. His job is to spread our new, more intelligently composed songs." "But what is more progressive about a musical director when your old sisters could already harmonize beautifully without any direction?" I asked. "That's not the modern educated way. They need direction to learn the more modern songs we want them to have. This is a new day and we must adapt to it. Take your own case. You're not here taking notes with a paper and pencil. You have the latest thing in recording equipment. The old must give way to the new." Reverend Martin was a most persuasive fellow, but I blundered on. "But what about Go Down, Moses, and Steal Away, and all the wonderful spirituals? You know, that they're considered great music by everyone in the world. Are you just going to throw all that away?" "Absolutely not," said the Reverend, offering me a songbook. "A lot of them are right here in this gospel songbook, and spanking new arrangements by our best gospel writers, and they have their place in the Reformed Baptist order of worship." I looked at the book as we wandered on through the fair. There were some of the great old songs, all right, but they were set like conventional 19th century hymns with no intimation of the fabulous head arrangements that their unprogressive country congregations always gave them. I thought of the hours I had spent with musicians trying to puzzle out the amazing intricacy of those old-fashioned renditions. In the end, we realized that we were looking at an original African-American way of handling harmony. So far as I know, this is an unresolved and neglected mystery. The new gospel songs were handled well with rather jazzy arrangements, but still essentially within the frame of conventional European tradition. There were some appealing tunes that might have been written by Stephen Foster, sentimental rather than noble and epic like the spirituals. The impersonal, heroic vein of Joshua fit the Battle of Jericho had vanished. The new songs were all ego, pleading with the Lord for personal dispensations. "When I'm on my dangerous journey, stand by me, precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand, I am tired," etc., etc. Clearly the ideal gospel worshiper was to feel defeated, helpless, alienated, and totally dependent.
Hell down on myself.